If I am not for myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? I would want to just leave people with the constant belief in the heart as our strongest muscle. And if not now, when?
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley, where we explore how midlife isn't a crisis, but a chrysalis, a time of profound transformation that can lead to the most meaningful chapter of your life.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis. This is Chip Conley, and our guest today is Mark Nepo. Mark Nepo has been called one of Oprah's favorite poets that's living in the world. And poetry has been considered the salve of the soul, the idea that poetry helps you to get in touch with your soul. He's a philosopher. He's also a cancer survivor, so we talk a little bit about that. He's an MEA faculty member, and more than anything, he's just a delight to be with. This hour went by very quickly, and I think you're going to learn a few things and maybe connect a little bit more deeply inside of yourself as a result of listening to Mark. I hope you enjoy the episode. Mark Nepo, my fellow bald brother. It's great to have you here on the Midlife Chrysalis. How are you? Are you in Kalamazoo? Where are you?
I'm in Kalamazoo at home. I just got back from a week in New York City where I was reading and talking about the new book.
Okay, so tell us about the new book. Yeah, the fifth season, Creativity in the Second Half of Life. This is how many books have you written now?
This is my 27th book published. If you would have asked me 20 years ago, this is more than I ever could have dreamt of. And this does apply to so much of what we're going to talk about. I think, I've learned over the years to get out of the way. At this point, writing is listening and taking notes. And one of the things, and then I'll talk about the new book, but one of the things I've learned over the years is that the introspective process and the creative process are really the same thing. And, that I just happen to write it down because that's how I learn, But this is very much about our journey through midlife and aging. Is our life is the work of art. The soul, I believe that the soul wants us to be as alive as possible. And it really doesn't care how we do that in terms of, but as long as if care is to the soul what wood is to a fire. The fire it doesn't matter to the fire what kind of wood you put on it, elm, pine, cherry. And I don't think the soul, it matters what kind of care, as long as we're wholehearted, as long as we hold nothing back. And so to get to this book, I've always used my life as a case study for the common passages that we all go through. As you know, I don't have any answers, but I share our examples, not instructions, and we're all just comparing notes on what it is to be here. So the new book, the fifth season, because I'm in the continent of aging, I'm 74. I met someone my age 20 years ago. I thought they were ancient. Doesn't seem so old now. But looking at this, I've really discovered, just like how my cancer journey, I think these passages, these transformational passages, which don't have to be life-threatening, it can be beauty, wonder, being loved unconditionally for the first time, but all of these passages bring into acute relief the choice points we all make throughout our lives. And so just as cancer did that for me, I think aging is doing that, because while this is focused on the second half of life, we're always aging from 20 to 40, from 40 to 60, from 60 to 100. And what I've been discovering is that, which I tried to explore in the book, is that we're invited to get better at a different set of skills as we age, and we can explore that. But living where our life is the work of art and we give our wholeheartedness to it, and the fifth season, where and this is another interesting thing, I saved that title from years ago, not knowing what book it would be for.
Explain what it is. Explain what the 5th season is in Chinese culture.
In Chinese lore, in Chinese culture, the 5th season is this time of year, late August, early September, where the light is bare and aglow, when things are down to their essentials. And early sages quickly tried to make an analogy, that the 5th season of life is that integrative time, that time where we look, we live forward, but we map backward. So how do we, oh, over the decades, I didn't know these things went together, and what we put down. And so it's that season of integration where everything becomes as clear and bare and simple and direct as possible. And I love this, Chip. They call that turning point the heavenly pivot.
Ooh, I love that. Yes. Let's take a step back for a minute. We'll come back to the book, but give us your history. I mean, how did you become a poet? And how did you become one of Oprah's favorite living poets, if not her favorite, especially with the Book of Awakening? So what give us your story, and especially give us the cancer story too, because then you and I can dialogue a little bit about cancer since as you know, I've been dealing with cancer as well.
Well, I think that at an early age, before I knew what a poet was, before I knew what metaphor was, I think as a child, even my native language was metaphor. Because even when I would be outside playing, I'd see wind through the trees, and without words, it would speak to me and say, "Okay, what am I like? What am I like? Come on." And and then later I learned that that was metaphor. But, I started writing in high school when the first woman I fell in love with, who went to college ahead of me, fell in love with someone else. I was devastated. And but in a moment, an amazing MEA moment. But then I started writing to heal from that, but I realized quickly I wasn't talking to myself. I had begun a conversation with the universe and never stopped. And the MEA moment is that 2 times ago, that first love, we reconnected after 55 years, and she came to my week at MEA.
How was that?
It
But
was
you
my
didn't
it
you
was
did not know she was coming, right?
I did know. She got
Okay,
in touch with me. We
okay, she
we
did, okay.
connected beforehand. It was incredibly graceful and special and beautiful that it would happen there. And after all that time, there we are. You know, I've got hearing aids. She has eye trouble. We are in our 70s, meeting after a lifetime, and it was beautiful. It was such a gift. But back to so in my early 30s, I had a rare form of lymphoma that grew in my skull, so like the size of a grapefruit. And, up until that time, I was a young, driven artist. I hoped, gee, if I could work hard enough, maybe I'd write 1 or 2 great poems, that could add to literature. Well, 31, in the hospital, upside down, inside out, forget writing great poems. I needed to discover true expressions that would help me live. Everything changed. I went through this tumor was an anomaly. It was a miracle. It vanished after months of tests, and it was really a miracle. And then I was spit back like Jonah out of the mouth of the whale, back into life. And 10 months later, a sister part of that had split off and was growing on a rib in my back. And that was my real despair, because I didn't need another wake up call. I was awake. No, thank you.
Ultimately, you wrote a book of awakening too, so we're gonna come back to that too. But let's go back to your story.
Then, I discovered then I needed surgery. I had that rib removed with its adjacent muscles. I had very aggressive chemo because though there was nothing left to find under the microscope, it was an aggressive cancer. So I was given very strong chemo, which almost killed me, gave me an ulcer in my esophagus, gave me neuropathy. Really, my hearing loss is not from aging, but from the chemo.
So were you having chemo all your whole body, or it was not concentrated chemo?
No, it was my whole body.
Yeah, yeah, that's oof, oof.
Yeah, it was my whole body. It was very it's a form I don't think a protocol I don't know that they use anymore, CHOP, which was kind of like a powerful shotgun. I came out of that, and then when the chemo started to kill me, I had to stop, and I've been well ever since. It's been almost 40 years, and I realized and discovered a couple of things that really shaped my whole life's work. One is that I was raised Jewish. I have a deep tie to the Jewish heritage, but I came out of that journey, Chip, and I was a student of all paths because I was not wise enough and still am not to know what worked and what didn't. And I think I was challenged to believe in everything. And all my work and my teaching is as a student of all paths. And so it's the poet in me that sees. It's the philosopher in me that tries to understand what I've seen. And it's the cancer survivor in me that says it's whatever it is, it's gotta be of use. It's gotta be of use in our daily lives. And so the other thing is that just is that I was way well, I was always heart-centered in my outlook. Before my cancer journey, I was up here a lot, and through no wisdom on my part, that just dropped me here. And ever since, my mind has served my heart.
If cancer was your teacher and you've graduated, at least for now, what would you say were some of the best lessons beyond just going from your brain to your heart?
Well, I think which have informed all my work. One is that there is no there, there's only here. We're all kind of mistrained and miseducated to think that life is one of the menacing assumptions in our modern world is that life is over there. If we can just get it, if we can chase it, if we can find it, if we can grab it, if we can steal it, if we can achieve it. And what great love and great suffering do is to blow all that up, and there's only here, so that life is not a journey from though we on the surface go from here to there. I fly from Michigan to MEA every year, but once and so do other people, but once we're there, when we're authentic and open-hearted, we open the same eternal moment. We enter it. The journey is really from in to out, not from here to there.
Yeah, they say once we're growing up, we're growing in, and there's a growing in process that certainly happens with cancer. Laura Carstensen at Stanford Center on Longevity has shown that when people have a perception that they have only a finite amount of time left in their life, they don't focus on the future nor the past. They focus on the present moment, and guess what? They become happier as a result. I know for me in my cancer journey, I have stage 3 prostate cancer that spread to my lymphs, and you know that, and it is right now either stable or in remission. But if you don't have I had 2 surgeries, 36 radiation sessions, 19 months of no testosterone, all as we were launching our MEA campus in Santa Fe. My God, and I was launching a book. In fact, I finished my last of the 36 radiation sessions. I had a double radiation session on the same day on a Friday, January 12th in San Francisco. On January 13th, I flew to New York. On January 15th, I was on Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos because on January 16th, Tuesday, my book, Learning to Love Midlife, was coming out. And then on January 17th, I was on the Today Show. So here I was literally within just, 48 hours, just a little over 48 hours going from 2 radiation sessions in one day, which is that takes it out of you. And the
Oh,
later radiation sessions are harder than the earlier ones because at that point, I had very concentrated radiation. My whole pelvis, my bowels, my bladder, everything is just so completely so wearing diapers on the Today Show. And yeah, and on Good Morning America. So I just think for me, the cancer journey has very much been one of learning how it not to be the hero's journey, not to how do I ask for help? How do I realize that I don't have to do it alone? How do I rethink, what matters to me in my life? And it has really helped me with MEA, and we'll talk more about MEA and your involvement in MEA toward the end. But it's helped me to create a succession plan. I've had 2 opportunities in my life to come face to face with death, the most recent one being cancer. But, I still have cancer inside of me, and I have no prostate, and I have prostate cancer, which means that it's spread throughout my lymph system. But it is stable at this point or in remission. But also I had an NDE at age 47. I died, 9 times over 90 minutes due to an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. So, there's this sense in life that why do we have to have these health journeys to remind us what's important in life? And for you, it seems as if your poetry journey was really deepened as a result of this, and ultimately, years later, you wrote the Book of Awakening. How when talk about that book in particular, because that was the book in many ways that put Mark Nepo on the global literary map, partly because Oprah, I guess, particularly loved the book and made it one of her Oprah Book Club books of the year. And talk about that book and your journey, including how did you let's start with how did you know that you might wanna be a poet? Yes, you had a metaphorical sense of the world, but when you were graduating from high school, not too many people say like, "Okay, I'm I wanna be a poet when I grow up." Did you know that at age 18?
I do think that often it is life-threatening or dramatic, powerful events that drop us into the depth of life. And everyone will be dropped one way or another, but it can also be wonder and beauty and surprise. And so it doesn't have to be just that. I think that human beings basically grow by willfully shedding and by being broken open, and often a combination or one leads to the other. But if we won't willfully shed, don't worry, we'll be broken open. And it does, it kinda removes it how we respond to being dropped in the depth of life is the beginning of the spiritual journey. But back to the being a poet, I knew that, I was the child my parents were children of the Great Depression. We had family that died in the Holocaust. I was the first in our family to go to college. And I got to college and I had this mystical experience where I went to Cortland State in upstate New York, which is on the top of a hill. You fall off on any side of the hill, you wind up in a bar in the college town. And in my freshman year, I was going down one of the sides of the hill. It was spring and a huge wind, a gust of wind came from behind me. And it stopped me, and on the far side of the valley, about a mile away, was another hill, and I just stood there, and in, 20 seconds or so, that wind, I could see it goes through the trees on the other hill. I understood the reach, and I knew I was a poet, even though I hadn't written anything. And the next break that I went to go home, I went home excitedly, 18, 19, and came in to the kitchen and said, "I'm a poet." And, they went pale, they were just my father, who was a master woodworker, taught at Brooklyn Tech High School in the city. My mother was a bookkeeper. Both were highly intelligent, but very literal, and she wanted me to be a lawyer. And I came home, and so we had that classic argument, "How are you gonna make a living?" And I don't know where it came from in me, but I said back, "I'm gonna live a making rather than make a living."
Oh, okay. Live a making. Okay.
That was my first instruction as a poet, um, which I took years to discover, and that wholeheartedness, that immersing ourselves in whatever is before us is what brings us alive, and in what we go to make because of that engagement, we are made whole, and that has a lot to do, even more so in aging and in midlife. How do we hold nothing back? And so what you were saying about how cancer for both of us brought us to the present. I think one of the skills I've discovered in aging is that because there are more years behind than ahead, you know, the proper place of dream and memory shifts. And so, nostalgia is I go back 20 years to a very special moment. And nostalgia is, oh, I wish I could be there now. But the true purpose of memory is to revisit the spark of life that animated me then, to see where it lives in me now because it hasn't gone anywhere. And the same thing with dream. Just because there's more years behind than ahead doesn't mean I don't dream. But dreams, I've come to believe, are the kindling of our aliveness. And so I dream forward, but then also the new skill is, okay, what spark is now projected forward that actually is right here in me? How does memory and dream come to enliven me now? And I think that's a new skill. Well, back to the Book of Awakening. So the Book of Awakening, I really wrote that on the other side of my cancer journey in 2000. It took 3 years to write, and I wrote it because I have many people in my life who are in recovery or children of alcoholics or addicts, and and I noticed that day books were, like, really used, they were in cars, bathrooms, back pockets, and it occurred to me that if I could fill that form with short doses of what matters, it might be of help. I could give something back. And so when that came out, it had for 10 years kind of a life of word of mouth, life of its own. And then in 2010, you know, the story is that one of Oprah's assistants, who I now know is a wonderful person, had heard a lot of yoga teachers use the Book of Awakening and quote it before a session. And her yoga teacher used it, and I now know the yoga teacher too very well. And Pierre, who was this young woman, she gave it to Oprah as a birthday present. And you know how that is. Like, if you're not in the right space or open, yeah, thank you very much. It goes on a shelf. Well, it just happened that was spoke to her at a time that she really was needed to hear it. And the next thing I know, she, is who is this guy? Can I talk to him? And you know how that goes. So one of her producers calls me, and we had a great extensive conversation. But I'm thinking the whole time, okay, which one of my friends is playing a joke on me? This can't be real. But that began our deep conversations, Oprah and I, and she is such an authentic bridger, and she doesn't have to do that. And of course, within 24 hours of her her belief in that book, it was all over the world. And, it was like a lightning strike. It's nothing that I, did. I just keep doing the work.
How was that for you? So let's this was 15 years ago, so you were in, like, 59 or 60, and you had been toiling away as a poet for 40 years. You'd been successful, let's be clear, you'd been successful, but n not had you had a New York Times bestseller yet, or
No, no, no.
so then all of a sudden this happens, and the book is 10 years old, and the Book of Awakening is like, well, finally the world has awakened to Mark's poetry, and Mark's prose. So how was that for you? In some ways, it's everyone who's in the public eye, not everyone, but many people have that dream that someday they'll be discovered. What was that like, the upside and the downside of that for you?
I would say, and this goes right back to a deep learning from the cancer journey, from almost dying. I'm very grateful for it, and it's allowed me so many opportunities to teach, be with people in a deep way, and it has nothing to do with the work. And so, this archetypal place that before, if we struggle as all artists in any field and are not known, the struggle is to not vanish or think that your voice doesn't matter if you're not heard. And so the image for me is that if you're walking into a strong wind, you got to plant your feet and lean forward and keep going. And if you're blessed to have the wind at your back, oh, it's the same walk. You just lean in a different direction. You plant your feet, you lean back so that you're stable, and you keep going. We have this misguided notion that life is this climb up a hill, and the higher we go, the more successful we are. Well, again, great love and great suffering flatten that out. And it's all this way. It's all horizontal, and we're the same 6 inches from the gutter in heaven. And so what happened to me, which I'm sure you can relate to in my cancer journey, and this is a metaphor again too, the only way I can kind of approach describing this is that through no wisdom on my part, it's like I was standing on a cliff, and, if you lean over the cliff, you see more. And so then I leaned further and I could see more. And then I fell and I saw maybe more than I was supposed to. And the adrenaline rush of falling off the cliff of life burned a lot of shit off me. Not that I have insecurities and to struggle with everything that everybody does, of course. But then the miracle was I was put back on the cliff. Entering all of this, of course, before my work was widely known, not being known was frustrating and struggling and all of that. But even then, and because of this experience, deep experience, while the human part you can't just hop over, even then it had nothing to do with the work. And so now that I'm blessed to be on the other side of that, not through any wisdom on my part, but I'm deeply, because during I don't know, I experienced during, I didn't have a near death. While I was near death, I didn't have a near death experience. But in that near death moments, I was being wheeled in to have my rib removed, fluorescent lights, you're in the thing. And I had this moment, Chip, where I dropped or was dropped below all names into the essence of things, which is the work of all poetry. I mean, that's the paradox of poetry is we try to name what's unnameable. And then coming back, of course, I'm Mark, you're Chip, but I forever live from the place below all names. So to be known and have all this attention, eh, thank you, you know.
If you're enjoying the conversations we've been having on the Midlife Chrysalis, I have a valuable offer for you to consider. My book, Learning to Love Midlife 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is a national bestseller. And right now, you can get a copy for just the cost of shipping. It offers stories, research, and practices to help you move from a midlife crisis to a midlife catalyst and see this stage of life not as a decline, but an opportunity to flourish. Claim your copy today at meawisdom.com/midlife book. Speaking of getting to work, let's give our listeners and viewers a poem. Let's what's a poem? I'm going to give you a little direction on this. A poem that you might leave on the road for someone. Someone might actually just happen upon the poem, and it's a poem that's well timed maybe for the times we're in right now, or just a poem, or what's the favorite poem that you would love to have be remembered by, when you leave this planet?
Well, those are a lot of different poems, but
Or how about one that's at your fingertips?
yeah. I mean, I would love to answer all of those, but we don't have that much time. Well, this is a poem because I wanna speak it's from the I put it, in the 5th season because it speaks to this human tension of moving between the blessing and the burden all the time. This is a poem called Pirouettes, and I learned a pirouette, well, we know it from dance, but actually the origin of the word, it's how horses, they gallop, there's all these different words. A pirouette is when a horse is on its hind legs and spins and turns around.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Some days, the simplest tasks seem weighty and endless. Make the bed, tuck in the sheet, make the coffee, stir, drink, find the bills, pay the bills. Some weeks, the days blur. Get on the plane, get off the plane, get in the car, get out of the car. Then I got your email saying, "Isn't this all a blessing? We get to make the bed and tuck in the sheet. We get to make the coffee and stir it and drink." I emailed you back, "Well, what's the difference?" You called me up immediately and said, "Oh, my friend, if we can just keep falling down and getting up, it all becomes a dance." And so, one of the things that's so important to share about my work as a poet is that I don't know these things before I explore them. And if I explore something, a feeling, a notion, an image, a story, a fear, honestly and authentically, then I'm given an insight as a reward. And that's where it's very much like the introspective process. So the lesson from that poem was, no, it's not the cheer me up, rah rah society. It's life is always both. There are days we wake up, I gotta make the bed again. And the next day, my God, I get to make the bed. And so the question is, how do we stay, and this again is so important and more acute in aging, how do we stay in the corridor of aliveness? Because part of our practice as a spirit in a body and time on earth is to navigate both. The proverbial question, is the glass half full or half empty? It's always both.
No, therefore, I want to hear the therefore.
Oh, well, therefore, this is this is the practice of being human, and this goes back to aging in a big way. One of the skills is, of course, on the physical plane, we meet limitations. Things are difficult or hard. And so not to turn from one to the other. At the same time, our entire lives we're deepening and expanding and becoming more light filled. So how do we stay open to both so that they inform each other and right size the limitations?
There's a quote I want to, it's a good time for me to say. This is also from the book, The Fifth Season. As the years go by, our physical veneer erodes while our interior becomes more evident. In time, the inside becomes the outside, no matter the precautions we've enlisted to hide it. Enlivened and engaged, who we are begins to appear like a natural spring, a depth of energy bubbling forth. And while our outer mask endures the weight of ordinary hours, our inner face is even more illuminated by the inner world. The salvation of being over time is that where the outside wears through, the inside shines forth. Is that how you're feeling at 74? And maybe do the bridge of that to creativity, and why
Yeah.
creativity is. I just a quick thought. In one of our MEA workshops in Santa Fe, recently, we had two. We had we had men, we had women. On average, about 64% of the people who come to MEA are women. Although we're having an increasing number of men now. We had two men in the same workshop, both of whom were contemplating retirement or had retired, who had decided in their 60s they wanted to become poets. And so there was this interesting element of like, one of them had been an insurance broker most of his life. He'd had an insurance agency that had been very successful. He sold it, but now he was a poet and he really wanted to own that creativity. So talk about the inside, the outside, and how in that process maybe creativity is one of the natural results of being able to go inside.
Let me define creativity in a deep, large sense, as not just restricted to art forms, but creativity is what comes through us when we are working to be fully alive and in relationship to all of life, to each other, to ourselves, and the light, so that we, in those moments of authentic living, become like inlets and life force comes through us. And, the word authentic literally means, from the Greek, authentes, mark of the hands. The hands literally, when we're a fetus, they literally grow out of the heart. Their first vestiges are known as arm buds. So authenticity is when what starts in the heart comes out through the hands. The thousand ways that can happen is creativity. And it's not really about producing great art. It's about giving ourselves wholeheartedly to whatever is calling us. And that makes our life our work of art. This was a lesson. It's interesting because my father, I mentioned, was a master woodworker. He was a creative force, though we worked in obviously different medium. And um, though now that he's gone about 12, 13 years, I realize a couple like lessons way that I didn't realize I was touched by, but didn't have their meaning till decades later. And one is around this. He he built a 30-foot sail, a ketch that I spent a lot of my youth on. And when he was in his 40s, and he started making half models, which he would get out of wood. He would get actual blueprints for ships from the 1800s and build them to scale, like 6 feet, and they were half because they would be mounted on a wall. And I remember being 9 or 10, sitting in our little basement steps that were see-through. He didn't know I was watching him with tweezers put thin rigging through small dead eyes, and all this. And that so stayed with me. I'd never seen anyone so immersed. And I realized he taught me the secret life of detail. And what I've come to realize, and it's relevant to what we're talking about, is he was so that it's the immersion that lets us experience oneness and wholeness and eternity. And the byproduct is excellence. He was so immersed, I can see all these years later, that he was in the moment of everyone who ever built a boat. And so when I go to the place below names and give my all, I am in the moment of every poet who ever lived. And when we share as friends and you are there for me in my pain, immersed, we trip into the moment of everyone who ever felt pain and whoever held someone in pain. And this is key to how we age and how we move from, it's interesting, like the insurance agent who's wonderfully discovered his inwardness. Well, back in the 1600s, there was a samurai in Japan named Masahide. And all of a sudden, I think he was, I don't know how old, I think he was around 50. He quit being a samurai and he sought out Basho, the great Japanese poet Basho, to study with him. I would have loved to interview that guy. What happened, right? And the one haiku that is famous, which also pertains to what we're talking about, from Masahide is, my barn Having burned to the ground, I can see the moon more completely. Masahide wrote that. And I don't think he had the experience to express that if he hadn't been a samurai, and he wouldn't have had the depth or awareness to say it if he hadn't become a poet. And so across our lives, we gather things and we seek our uniqueness to learn who we are. And then somewhere, and there's no one point, somewhere in midlife and through aging, we put it all down to be who we are.
You've said you wrote actually, aging is a journey into simplicity. Is that simplicity really about maybe tearing away the identities, all of the garments we've been wearing? Like, we've been wearing 6 or 7 garments, and it's time to take those off. And as we get older, we learn that we don't need all of those uniforms, and we get back down to something more essential to who we
Yeah.
are. And is that where that allows us maybe to have the creativity flow like a spring more naturally through us?
And there's a paradox there because letting go of all the garments and facades and roles allows the creativity, but it's also through creativity of expression, whatever that expression is, that we let go of the garments. And again, while there's an if there's a natural elemental and kind of transformational journey over years, and there is the abrupt revelation of great love and great suffering that can happen anywhere, that can happen at any time in life. There's in the Japanese tea ceremony, there's a whole religious aspect to that, and the tea hut is purposely designed, the entrance to it, narrow and low to the ground, so that whoever comes has to take off and bow to enter. And I think we could equate that tea hut with the threshold to wisdom. And there's a great example in the history of the tea ceremony. There were two guys who were boyhood friends, Taiko and Rikyu, and Taiko became a general and an emperor, and Rikyu became a tea master. And still, every once in a while, Taiko would come to visit Rikyu in the tea, and he would have to enter the garden, take his sword off, take his armor off, get down with nothing to enter the tea hut. And it doesn't mean that we don't live in the world. This is where, for me at least, so a very practical thing we were talking about. So, ever since on the other side of my cancer journey, I'm a list maker. I, I scribble and so every morning I make a list of the things that have to be done and the things I want to do. And then I have a cup of coffee. My dog is with my wife now, but usually our dog is here up in my study. And then I take the list apart and say, if this is the last day I'm here on earth, what stays on the list? And it might be that I call you up again to say I love you, even though I talked to you yesterday. So you might say, well, why make the list? Because I live in the world. So I make the list and then I take it apart every day. That's part of the between the burden and the blessing. That's the glass is half full and half empty. That's the corridor. That's one way to return to the corridor of aliveness, not to retreat from the world or hide in the world, but to be in that deep space and move in the world.
So much fun to talk with you because I feel like you're reciting poetry even though you're not reciting poetry, but you are reciting poetry. Your life is poetry. So let's talk about the poetry of friendship because I know this is a topic that is you've been writing about that the last few years, and the idea of friendship as being part of a spiritual flourishing life. Give us your point of view on this because so many people come to this age of life, the midlife and later stages, and a lot of men have had their friendship muscle atrophy because the last time they really gave investment to friendship was maybe when they were in college. And women have a natural, just are much better at friendship and they're much better at juggling. But what wisdom do you have to offer around the importance of friendship in midlife and beyond?
Yeah, thank you. And to start with, the word friendship comes from a German root word that means place of high safety.
You're an etymologist. You're an etymologist.
And I'm interested in word origins, not because I'm a word geek, but because I've found that just like things erode in nature, words erode over the centuries. And more often than not, if we go back as far as we can, they're more whole, they're more helpful. And my next book coming out next summer is I've gathered 50 years of looking at these into a book called The Language of the Soul.
It's a natural next step for you. I could be your literary agent. "Hey, Mark, there's a book that you're supposed to be writing." Alright, tell us about friendship and the safety.
So friendship, this place of high safety, and of course, this we learn it most with others, but our being authentic and showing up for each other also models for us how to show up for ourselves, how to befriend, and so befriending becomes a spiritual practice. And why do I say that? Because it's different than conceptualizing. Most of the things too big to understand, we conceptualize when we need to befriend them. We need to befriend life, nature, the unknown, the soul. Because if I befriend you, that's different than conceptualizing you. Inherently, I am in. I am making commitments. I'm showing up with my heart. Okay. So this is an apprenticeship. Our friendship with each other is an apprenticeship to befriending as a spiritual practice, as a spiritual practice. And that is essential as we age so that we are more connected to everything. And I think that, you know, I've realized I don't have the poem right here, but I've realized along the way that, you know, I'd rather be a friend than a saint. I'd rather and also it means that befriending our own growth. So one of the things we do in our world is our modern world is we often mistake consistency for reliability. I'm a friend with I'm committed to our friendship, right? And but I'm changing. And you say, well, wait a minute, you're not the same. I don't know if I can depend on you. Those have nothing to do with each other. Our vow of friendship, of place of high safety is I can change 100 ways. You still can count on me and you can support my changing because the true love of friendship means that I want you to grow, not stay the same.
What you've just described is a perfect segue to talk about MEA for a moment because people come to MEA to be in a workshop in person in Baja or in Santa Fe. And often in the course of just a few days together, they build these deep connections with others and they feel the permission to the enlightened witnesses of everybody around them, and they have been an enlightened witness for others, to actually blossom in new ways. And then they're fearful of going home because of this issue that you're mentioning, which is this mistaken belief that if you're different than you used to be, you're no longer reliable, or you no longer fit together with my puzzle. I want you to fit together with my puzzle pieces. So talk about your experience, Mark, of being at MEA and leading MEA and what you witnessed there during the course of a workshop. And your next workshop, I think, is next winter, late winter, in Baja, which is your primary spot where you do your workshops.
Yes, and I love being there. And you've created it's such a holy container for this kind of deep work. everything is just supports it, and the wonderful people who are all there. So what I experience so often is once we enter, and this is where our work, your work, our work, my work, and the work of MEA is, I feel like I am there to open a heart space that we can enter together to help people discover their own gifts and become more intimate with their own wisdom. And then how to bring that back in the world, because when we meet like that, it's a resource, not a refuge. And so often when we come out of that kind of experience, and I often have people say, "Well, how am I supposed to talk about this when I go home?" And and I feel like it's not something you can report on, but you can share a question, a story, a presence. And even in within someone's own heart, I say, where what we're because often people feel like, well, this circle is never going to be again. Although wonderfully, we you have so many cohorts that keep together, which I think is such a wonderful thing. And but I invite people to say before they leave, to say, okay, feel what you're feeling right now, where it is in you, so that when you get home, like we've poured it into this container, but when you get home, what glass can you pour it into in your daily life? It's there. It hasn't gone. And the truth is, the work we do, we don't give anybody anything they didn't walk in with the first night. We simply love it together into the open. And boy, I don't know. There is no other work I would want to do.
Well, you are a master and a magician and a poet and a philosopher, and so people love their time with you. So it has been a transformative experience for people. I wanna see if you have I have one last question for you, but I wanna give you a chance to give another poem if there's another poem you'd like to read. No obligation.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a poem that I love to share, and it's called "Free Fall." If you have 1 hour of air and many hours to go, you must breathe slowly. If you have 1 arm's length and many things to care for, you must give freely. If you have 1 chance to know God and many doubts, you must set your heart on fire. We are blessed. Each day is a chance. We have 2 arms. Fear wastes air.
Oh, beautiful. The breathing of life from Mark Nepo. Thank you. One last question for you, Mark. If someone said, "Mark Nepo, I want you to put a piece of wisdom. It has your fingerprints on it, and we now understand the importance of fingerprints and hands. This is a piece of wisdom. You could put it on a bumper sticker. It's got to be brief, and it has an origin story attached to it. What might that bumper sticker be? That wisdom bumper sticker with your fingerprints on it, and what's the origin story if we haven't heard it yet?
Well, actually, I'm going to defer to a line that's actually from D.H. Lawrence, who, so if I can, I'm going to give you 2 quick little things. So, one, D.H. Lawrence in a poem said, "Not I, but the wind that blows through me." And I feel that, my journey through almost dying and my love of life, um, we are all conduits. We are all inlets. We are all vessels for all that is holy. And that's where I love the Hindu namaste. People say namaste, but I use the Brooklyn version, namaste, which means beautifully, honor portion of universal spirit that resides in you. So we we are ourselves, and when we are most ourselves, we carry everything that is not us. And the other is maybe the greatest haiku that was ever written, hundreds of years before haiku was a form, and it's from Rabbi Hillel in the 1st century, where he said, "If I am not for myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? And so our constant I would want to just leave people with the constant belief in the heart as our strongest muscle, and if not now, when?
Well, this hour together has been, if not now, when for me, because I don't get to spend enough time with you. I just want to say thank you for how you've shown up in the world and blossomed at age 74. You continue to blossom, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow, I feel like I have just had a massage of my soul by Mark Nepo, no less. You know, if I were to try to summarize 3 key lessons I got from this experience talking to Mark was he said something early in the episode. He said, "I'm gonna live a making." When he was 20 years old, he was not focusing on making a living, and of course, his parents didn't think it was very practical for him to be a poet. So he came up with the term, "I'm gonna make a living." I really loved that. I at first, I didn't know what he meant, but I in essence, I know the life I wanna live, and I'm gonna make that life. I'm gonna befriend that life, a word that he used in the episode. How do you befriend not just friends, but befriend a life? So the idea of how do you curate a life, especially a creative life, it feels like it's got your fingerprints all over it. Secondly, he talked about the blessing or a burden, and this is so true so often in life. The thing that looks like a burden turns out to be a blessing, whether that's a cancer diagnosis, whether that's a divorce, whether that's a business going under. There's a lot of things that we don't want to have happen to us that at first look like a blessing. I'm sorry, at first look like a burden, and then you realize they're a blessing. And he talked about staying in the corridor of aliveness, so you could see both the blessing and the burden. And then he also talked later about making these lists of the things he wants to do in his life. And then if he knew he only had a day left to live, which of these things would he actually do? Which of these things would he actually actualize in his last 24 hours? So I think this idea that life is not black and white, there's a gray area. And I think poetry is learning to actually play in that gray area. And midlife is. Midlife is learning how to live with the contradictions of midlife, learning to become happier and have more life satisfaction at a time when your body is not what it used to be and you're starting to have more ailments. That's the mystery of the U curve of happiness, that people get happier after age 50 as their health and their wellness may be actually not as good. I think the third thing I took from this, and I never heard this before, the authenticity and the root of the word authenticity, which comes from the heart. And the fact that our hands, when we're a fetus and we're starting to grow into a full-fledged baby in the womb, what is going on is the hands actually come from the heart. And so authenticity and maybe even creativity is learning how to take the heart and actualize it into something, into some form, whether that form was his father as a woodworker working on those shipping models, those ship models, or whether it's Mark with his writing and his poetry. How do you allow your heart to actually be a flame, and then your creativity channels through you as a result? So, for those of you who have been thinking about becoming a poet later in life, I hope this was an inspiration for you and that you will check out Mark's newest book, The Fifth Season, which is all about learning to have creativity in the second half of your life. I'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Chrysalis. This show is produced by Midlife Media. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform.